The Dreamcast was released 12 years ago in the US, and while some don't want to count it as a retro system, it was released 2 years before my cutoff date of 2001, plus it was discontinued in the US in 2001, so I like to count it. Besides the fact it's just a really great system, and one of my favorites. So to celebrate the anniversary of the Dreamcast, let's check out one of its launch titles, Soul Calibur. Let's just be honest and forward here, as I'm sure many of you have played Soul Calibur. Simply put, it is a great fighting game, and just a well-made game all around. If you haven't played Soul Calibur before, it is time you do. Just to play it makes spending the probably combined $50 for it and a Dreamcast fully worth it in my opinion. Soul Calibur was actually the first game I ever played on a Dreamcast, and I remember thinking, or probably actually saying out loud, wow, this is gorgeous. This isn't just nostalgia goggles talking either years later. The game's graphics are just very polished, and the artwork really draws you in. To me, Soul Calibur looks better than games that came years later on the PS2. Now, I'm not a graphics whore. I'm a retro gamer. This should be obvious. I still love my 2600, but there is something to be said about a game that still strikes you visually 12 years later. Soul Calibur's claim to fame is being a weapon-based fighting game. Fighters had swords, staffs, whips, huge axes, and more. Of course, beyond that, it technically plays like your average fighter. Each fighter has high and low attacks, forward attacks, blocks, and of course specials. To me, the difference comes because each fighter would have a more unique and defined fighting style to fit their weapon. Someone who is swinging a giant axe doesn't walk around and have the same reach as someone with a katana. As with any fighting game, there's a nice roster of characters to choose from. Each one has their own feel, not just in their attacks, but how they move. Of course, their weapons may help sway your decision as well. My personal favorite is Mitsurugi, the seafaring samurai who fights with a katana. He has long, sweeping attacks, powerful and elegant, you could say. Sofita has a broad sword and shield, and it leads to her having more stiff style, while fighter Maxi fights with nunchucks, and once you start to move, he keeps spinning them as long as you keep moving, which makes him a combo machine. I don't want to go through each fighter, as that just gets tedious, but they all have their ups and downs and unique differences that will either draw you in or massively turn you off. You can play as Ivy and have both a short-range sword and a long-range whip, but if her fun weapon and revealing clothing turns you off, you could play as the really creepy Voldo. Seriously, this slinky S&M character is super creepy to me. Just look at him move around. Ugh. Being a 3D fighter, your arena is a full ring and not just a flat plane. The different arenas are really nice, creating pretty scenery to look at as well as destroy your enemies in. Fighting games hadn't really gotten to that level of full interactive areas to fight in, so you're restricted to the floating arena in the foreground area. But you can of course fall off or throw your enemies off the arena, which has you falling off a cliff or into a pool of lava. I personally love knocking people out of rings. The game includes several modes of gameplay to keep you coming back. Of course, there's the arcade mode, which just has you going through round after round to eventually fight a final boss. Pretty typical. After your character wins, you'll be treated to them saying one of their catchphrases, usually mocking the opponent, and of course if you lose, the role's reversed. I really enjoy the fact that they didn't dub over the original voice acting and just instead subtitled. There is a story attached to the arcade mode of why each character wants to beat all these people to gain the Soul Blade, but like other fighting games that have stories, it hardly matters. You will get a cutscene before you fight the last fighter before the boss, and you get a neat little storybook ending to wrap up the story as well. After you've played the arcade mode, you can of course play the standard verse mode against the buddy, and there's a co-op team mode that cycles with 4 players. But there's also a survival mode that allows you to fight round after round until you lose, just to see how long you can go, and then lastly, the time attack to test how fast you can beat your enemies. There is also a mission mode that tries to make the game more adventure-oriented, where you must complete tasks every round to move around the map. In the beginning, the missions revolve around you fighting a trainer and has you master a certain move. A helpful way to have you master the game. You also gain points this way, and whenever you win other modes, that you can trade in for unlockable game art and extra clothing variations for your characters. In reality, I'm not a big fan of fighting games. There was always Mortal Kombat, and of course I played others over time with friends, but Soul Calibur was always different. In fact, it and Mortal Kombat were probably the only 2 games I spent a lot of time playing on my own in both the arcades and at home. Soul Calibur was a great way for Sega to show off the possibilities of the Dreamcast, and it still holds up well today. I'll see you next time.